Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Thrift Store Find. William Booker wasn't the sentimental type. 15 years in military intelligence had trained that weakness out of him. But when his wife, Jenny, dragged him into the Salvation Army thrift store on a rainy Saturday afternoon, he found himself oddly drawn to a worn leather bomber jacket hanging in the back corner. "That thing looks like it survived a war," Jenny said, wrinkling her nose at the scuffed brown leather. "That's why I like it." William ran his hand over the jacket. The leather was soft, broken in by years of wear. When he tried it on, it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for him. The clerk barely glanced up as he paid the $15. At home, William hung the jacket in his office, the converted garage where he ran his private investigation business. It had been 3 months since he'd officially hung out his shingle, 3 months since he'd left the Army and traded surveillance of foreign assets for cheating spouses and insurance fraud. Jenny said he needed to stop chasing ghosts. He'd told her he was trying. That night, William couldn't sleep. Something about the jacket kept pulling at the edge of his mind. At 2 a.m., he gave up and went to his office. Under his desk lamp, he examined the jacket more carefully. The stitching was quality work, military grade. There were faint stains on the cuffs, oil, maybe blood. Someone had loved this jacket, worn it until it became his second skin. He checked the pockets. Nothing in the outside ones. But in the interior breast pocket, his fingers brushed against something smooth and glossy. A Polaroid. The photograph showed a woman in her 30s, standing on what looked like a mountain overlook. She had dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes that seemed to see right through the camera. The photo had that faded quality of something from decades ago, the colors slightly off, the edges yellowed. William flipped it over. 3 words in precise handwriting. Find me. Below that, an address, 3847 Ridge Point Road. William's hands went cold. He knew that address. Every PI in the state knew it. Ridge Point was the highest overlook in the Cascade Range, a spot where people went to think, to propose marriage, or to jump. 3 people had died there in the last decade alone. He turned the photo back over, studying the woman's face. There was something familiar about her, something that nagged at the corner of his memory. He grabbed his laptop and ran a reverse image search, but the photo was too old, too degraded. Nothing came up. "Will, what are you doing?" Jenny stood in the doorway, wrapped in her bathrobe, her blonde hair mussed from sleep. "Found something in the jacket." He showed her the Polaroid. Jenny frowned. "That's creepy. Just throw it away. Someone left this here deliberately. Or someone lost it. It's a thrift store jacket, honey. Who knows how many people owned it before you?" She crossed him, put her hands on his shoulders. "You're looking for mysteries where there aren't any. Not everything is a case." She was probably right. William tucked the Polaroid back into the pocket and followed his wife to bed. But sleep wouldn't come. The woman's face stayed with him, those sharp eyes that seemed to be looking at him, not at the photographer. By morning, he'd made his decision. "I'm going to check it out," he told Jenny over coffee. "Check what out?" "The address. Ridge Point." Jenny set her mug down hard. "William Booker, you are not driving 2 hours into the mountains because of some random photo in a jacket. It won't take long. I'll be back by dinner. This is what I'm talking about. You see mysteries everywhere. You're retired from intelligence work, remember? You're supposed to be building a normal business here. I am. This is just... I need to know." Jenny's face softened. She reached across the table and took his hand. "I know you miss it. The Army, the cases, feeling like you're making a difference. But chasing every strange thing you find isn't going to fill that hole." "I know." He squeezed her hand. "But I have to do this. Call it instinct." She sighed. "Your instincts have kept you alive this long. I won't bet against them now. Just be careful and be home for dinner. I'm making lasagna." "I will." He kissed her and grabbed his keys. The drive to Ridge Point took him through dense pine forests and winding mountain roads. William had been here once before, years ago, on a case involving a missing hiker. They'd never found the body. The mountain had swallowed it whole. As he drove, William's mind wandered back to his mentor, Howard Rankin. Howard had trained him when William first joined military intelligence, taught him how to read people, how to spot the lies beneath the surface. Howard had been the best analyst in the unit. Sharp, thorough, never missed a detail. Then one day, 15 years ago, Howard had simply vanished. Left his apartment, his car, his entire life behind. The Army had investigated, found nothing. No body, no evidence of foul play, no leads. Howard Rankin had stepped out of existence as cleanly as smoke. William had never believed it was voluntary. Howard wasn't the type to run. He was the type to dig in and fight. The parking lot at Ridge Point was empty except for a single car, a weathered Honda from the early 2000s. William parked beside it and stepped out into the mountain air. It was late October, and the wind carried the bite of coming winter. The overlook was a 10-minute walk up a well-worn trail. William's boots crunched on fallen leaves as he climbed. His breath misted in the cold air. He kept his hand near his concealed carry, old habits from war zones that never quite left. At the top, the trail opened onto a rocky promontory that jutted out over the valley. The view was spectacular, endless mountains rolling away in shades of green and gray, a river snaking through the bottom like a silver thread. And standing at the edge, looking out over the valley, was an old woman. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall, with white hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a heavy wool coat and sturdy hiking boots. When she heard William approach, she turned. Her face was lined with age, weathered by time and grief. But the eyes, sharp, intelligent, seeing right through him, those eyes he knew, they were the same eyes from the Polaroid. "It took you so long to find me," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor underneath, like a violin string pulled too tight. William stopped, his mind racing. The woman in the photo had been in her 30s. This woman was easily in her 70s, which meant 15 years, the old woman continued. 15 years I've been waiting for someone smart enough, someone who cared enough, to put on that jacket and find what I left behind. "Who are you?" "My name is Laverne Sprague, but you knew my son better." She reached into her coat and pulled out another photograph, this one more recent. She held it out to William. His hand shook as he took it. The photo showed a man in his 40s, laughing, holding a beer. William knew that face. He'd spent 3 years learning from it, trusting it, following it into situations where one wrong move meant death. "Howard," William breathed. "Howard Rankin," Laverne confirmed. "Your mentor, your friend, the man who taught you everything you know." She looked at him steadily. "The man who was murdered." Chapter 2, The Truth Beneath. William's training kicked in before his emotions could. He guided Laverne away from the edge of the overlook to a bench set back from the drop. She moved with the careful steps of someone who'd made this climb many times. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start from the beginning." Laverne pulled her coat tighter. "Howard was working on something before he disappeared. He wouldn't tell me what, said it was classified. But I knew my son, Mr. Booker. I raised him alone after his father died. I knew when he was scared. Howard didn't scare easily. No, but in those last few weeks, he was terrified. He called me every night. Said he was following a lead that went deeper than he'd thought. Said if anything happened to him, I should trust no one official. No police, no military, no one." William felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What else did he say?" "He told me he'd left insurance. Evidence hidden where only someone like him would think to look. He said if the worst happened, I should wait. Wait until someone worthy found it." She gestured to the jacket. That was his favorite. He wore it every day off duty. When he disappeared, I went to his apartment. Everything was there except that jacket. Someone took it. Someone staged it. Made it look like Howard left voluntarily. But I knew better. Howard would never leave without saying goodbye to me. Never. Laverne's voice cracked. I spent a year searching for answers. I hired private investigators, called in favors, knocked on every door I could think of. Nothing. The Army said they'd investigated. Found no evidence of foul play. Case closed. They didn't try very hard, Williams said bitterly. He remembered the official report. Suicide or voluntary disappearance. It had concluded. Howard Rankin had cracked under pressure and walked away from his life. William had never believed it. So I started my own investigation. I was just a retired school teacher, But Howard had taught me a few things over the years. How to watch people. How to ask questions without seeming to ask questions. Laverne pulled out a worn notebook from her coat. I found a jacket 6 months after he disappeared. It was in a pawn shop in Portland, along with some of his other things. I bought it all back. Why not go to the police then? Because of what I'd learned by then. She opened the notebook, showing pages filled with neat handwriting. Howard's last case involved a man named Carroll Taylor. Wealthy businessman, owns half a dozen companies across the Northwest. Real estate, construction, trucking. On paper, he's a pillar of the community. Donates to charity, goes to church, the whole act. William felt his stomach tighten. He'd heard that name before. What was Howard investigating him for? I don't know the specifics. But in the week before he disappeared, Howard made 3 trips to Taylor's main warehouse in Portland. He was taking photos, collecting evidence. And he told me he'd discovered something that would bring down a lot of powerful people, not just Taylor. Did you find any of that evidence? No. That's why I needed someone like you. Laverne closed the notebook. I left the Polaroid in the jacket pocket. That photo was taken here the day I turned 35. Howard always joked that this was my place, my fortress. I knew if someone found the jacket and had the instincts Howard saw in you, they'd come here. But why wait 15 years? Why not contact me directly? Laverne's eyes went hard. Because for the first 5 years, I was being watched. My phone was tapped, my mail opened, men following me in stores. They wanted to make sure Howard hadn't told me anything. When I tried to reach out to Howard's old unit, my letters never got through. My emails bounced. I was cut off. William's jaw clenched. This was exactly the kind of operation he knew from his military days. Someone with resources and connections had buried Howard Rankin, then made sure anyone who might ask questions was neutralized. Who's they? Just Carroll Taylor. Taylor is part of it, but he's not alone. There's a detective, Dwayne Flynn. He handled Howard's missing persons case. Closed it within a week. I tried to get him to reopen it, and he threatened to have me committed. Said I was having a mental breakdown, that I was imagining things. William made a mental note of the name. Anyone else? I'm not sure, but I know it goes higher than a businessman and a cop. The way they shut me down, the way all official channels closed, that takes serious power. Laverne looked at him intently. I waited, Mr. Booker. I waited for the surveillance to stop. I waited for the right person to find that jacket. Howard used to talk about you. Said you were the best analyst he'd ever trained. Said you had a gift for seeing the truth. Howard taught me that gift. Then use it. Find out what happened to my son. Find out why they killed him. And make them pay. The old woman's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm 76 years old. I have cancer. Stage 4. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe 8. I need to know the truth before I die. I need justice for my boy. William reached out and took her hand. It was small and cold in his. I'll find the truth. I promise you that. And the people who did this, they'll get what they deserve. Laverne nodded, satisfied. Good. Because I didn't spend 15 years waiting for a Boy Scout. I waited for someone who would do what needs to be done. She pulled a key from her pocket. Howard's storage unit. I paid the rent for 15 years, kept it sealed. Whatever evidence he hid, it might be there. The address is in my notebook. William took the key and the notebook. As he did, something fell out from between the pages. Another photograph, this one showing Howard with a young woman. She had long dark hair and scared eyes. Who's this? I don't know. I found it tucked in Howard's desk after he disappeared. Never could identify her. Laverne stood, moving with difficulty. Find her. I think she's the key to everything. Let me drive you home. No. I drove myself here, and I'll drive myself back. But Mr. Booker, William, be careful. These people have already killed once to protect their secrets. They won't hesitate to kill again. William watched her descend the trail, this small, fierce woman who'd spent 15 years grieving and planning and waiting. He looked out over the valley, at the mountains rolling away to infinity, and thought about Howard. His mentor had known he was in danger, had known he might not survive, but he'd left breadcrumbs, clues for someone smart enough to follow. And he'd trusted his mother to find that someone. William pulled out his phone and took photos of every page in Laverne's notebook. Then he looked at the photo of Howard with the mysterious woman again. She was young, mid-20s at most, and there was something haunted in her expression, like she'd seen things no one should see. Who was she? And why had Howard kept her photo hidden in his desk? William descended the mountain with more questions than answers. But he also had something he'd been missing for the last 3 months. A purpose. A case that mattered. Jenny would understand. She always did. Chapter 3. The Storage Unit. William didn't go straight home. He drove to Portland, to the address Laverne had written in her notebook. The storage facility was on the industrial edge of the city, a sprawling complex of orange doors and security cameras. He used Howard's key at the main gate, then drove through the maze of units until he found a right number, 247. The unit was climate-controlled, one of the larger ones. When William rolled up the door, he half expected it to be empty, another dead end in a case full of them. Instead, he found a treasure trove. File boxes lined the walls, each one labeled in Howard's precise handwriting. A laptop sat on a small desk, covered in dust. A corkboard leaned against the back wall, covered in photographs, documents, and red string connecting them all. The classic conspiracy wall of someone deep in an investigation. William pulled the door down behind him and turned on the single overhead light. Then he spent the next hour photographing everything before he touched anything. Old habits from crime scenes. The corkboard told a story. At the center was a photograph of Carol Taylor, a handsome man in his 50s, silver hair, expensive suit, politician smile. Around him were photos of buildings, warehouses, office complexes, a shipping yard. Documents showing business licenses, property deeds, shipping manifests. And photos of women. Dozens of them. Young women, mostly in their 20s, many looking Eastern European or Asian. Some photos looked like surveillance shots, grainy, taken from a distance. Others looked like they'd been pulled from social media or missing persons reports. William's blood ran cold. He'd seen operations like this before in Bosnia and Afghanistan. Human trafficking, modern slavery dressed up in corporate paperwork and legitimate business fronts. Howard had been investigating Carol Taylor's trafficking operation. William found the young woman from Laverne's photograph. Her picture was pinned near the top of the board with a note in Howard's writing. Vicky Tucker. Escaped, in hiding, protect. So she had a name, and she'd gotten away from whatever Carol Taylor had planned for her. William pulled out his phone and started researching. Vicky Tucker brought up a missing persons report from 15 years ago, a 23-year-old woman who disappeared from Seattle. No leads, no suspects, case gone cold. But according to Howard's notes, she hadn't disappeared. She'd run from something. The laptop was password protected, but William knew Howard's thinking. He tried several combinations based on their shared experiences until one worked. Laverne 1976, his mother's name and birth year. The laptop came to life. Howard had kept meticulous records. Spreadsheets tracking shipping containers through Carol Taylor's trucking company. Dates and locations that corresponded with missing persons reports. Financial records showing money laundering through shell corporations. Photos of Taylor meeting with other men, businessmen, politicians, at least one face William recognized as a regional FBI director. This wasn't just a trafficking ring. This was organized crime with protection from the highest levels. And then William found the video file. The timestamp showed it was recorded 2 days before Howard disappeared. William clicked play. Howard's face filled the screen. He looked exhausted, stubble on his jaw, dark circles under his eyes. But his voice was steady. If you're watching this, I'm probably dead. And if you found this, you're probably someone I trusted. Maybe Will. God, I hope it's Will. William's throat tightened. I've been investigating Carol Taylor for 8 months. Started when Vicky Tucker showed up at my door, half dead from exposure, telling a story about being kidnapped and held in one of Taylor's warehouses. She escaped. Most don't. Taylor's operation is extensive. He brings women in through his trucking company, hidden in regular commercial shipments. Most are promised jobs, green cards, a better life. Instead, they're forced into prostitution or domestic slavery. Taylor sells them to wealthy clients across the country. I've documented at least 30 women in the last year alone. I took my evidence to my commanding officer 3 days ago, Colonel Peterson, showed him everything. He told me drop it. Said I was mistaken. That Taylor was a valued defense contractor, that I was jeopardizing national security operations. Howard laughed bitterly on the screen. National security. That's the cover. Taylor supplies cheap labor to black ops facilities, places that can't be officially staffed. He's connected to people at levels I can't touch. I tried going around Peterson, but every door closed. I'm radioactive, so I'm putting this in storage. Insurance, in case they come for me. Vicky's in hiding. I won't say where, but I've left clues you can follow. Find her. She's the witness who can bring this whole thing down. To whoever's watching, be careful. These people kill. They've killed before, they'll kill again. But don't let that stop you. Someone has to do the right thing here. Someone has to get justice for those women. And Will, if it's you watching this, I'm sorry. I should have taught you that sometimes the good guys don't win. Sometimes the system protects the monsters. But I also taught you to never give up. So don't. Finish what I started. The video ended. William sat in the silence of the storage unit, his hands shaking with rage. Howard had tried to do the right thing, had taken his evidence to his superiors, followed proper channels. And they'd shut him down because Carol Taylor had connections, money, power. Then they'd killed him to keep him quiet. William spent the next 2 hours going through the files, photographing documents, copying everything to an encrypted drive. He found Howard's notes on Vicky Tucker's location, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to a small town called Ridgefield, Washington. A fake name she was using, Jean Grey. An address Howard had confirmed 3 weeks before his disappearance. 15 years ago. Would she still be there? Only one way to find out. William closed up the storage unit and drove home. It was after midnight when he pulled into his driveway. The lights were still on. Jenny was waiting up. "You missed dinner," she said when he came in. There was no anger in her voice, just resignation. "What did you find?" William sat down at the kitchen table and told her everything. Jenny listened without interrupting, her face growing paler as the story unfolded. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "This is dangerous," she finally said. "I know. These people have connections. They've already killed Howard. They could kill you. I know." Jenny reached across the table and took his hand. "But you're going to do it anyway." "I have to. Howard was my friend. He trusted me. And those women," William's voice broke. "They're slaves, Jenny. Right here, in our country, and no one's doing anything about it. Not no one. You." She squeezed his hand. "I knew when I married you that you were the kind of man who couldn't walk past injustice. It's what I love about you. It's also what terrifies me. I'll be careful. You better be, because I'm not losing you to this." She stood and pulled him up. "Come to bed. You'll need rest. Tomorrow, you start planning." As William lay in bed next to his wife, listening to her breathing slow into sleep, his mind was already working. This wasn't the kind of case he could just turn over to the police. Carol Taylor had cops in his pocket. Detective Dwayne Flynn had proved that 15 years ago. No, this required a different approach. William had spent 15 years in military intelligence. He knew how to gather evidence, how to build a case, how to find people who didn't want to be found. And he knew how to bring down targets that seemed untouchable. Carol Taylor thought he was protected, thought his money and connections made him invincible. William would prove him wrong. Chapter 4, Ghost Witness. Ridgefield was a small town 45 minutes north of Portland, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed. William drove through it slowly, taking in the layout. Main Street had a coffee shop, a hardware store, a post office. Residential streets branched off in neat grids. The address Howard had listed was a small house on Maple Street. White siding, blue shutters, a tidy garden out front. William parked down the block and watched for 30 minutes. No movement, no cars in the driveway. He was debating whether to knock or come back later when the front door opened. A woman stepped out wearing scrubs, carrying a purse and a travel mug. She was in her late 30s now, blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. But William recognized the bone structure, the way she moved. Vicky Tucker, or Jean Grey, as she was calling herself now. She got into an older Ford sedan and drove away. William followed at a discreet distance. She drove to Ridgefield Memorial Hospital, a small regional facility. He watched her park in the employee lot and head inside through a staff entrance. A nurse. She'd built a life here, far from whatever horrors Carol Taylor had put her through. William couldn't just approach her at work. Too public, too many witnesses. And after 15 years in hiding, she'd be spooked by any stranger asking questions. He needed a different angle. He spent the next few hours researching. Found her current identity. Jean Grey, registered nurse, worked in the ER. No social media presence, unlisted phone number. She'd been careful to stay invisible. But everyone had to eat. William staked out her house again that evening. She came home at 7, pulled into her garage, didn't come back out. Lights went on inside. A shadow moved past the windows. He knocked at 8 o'clock. When she opened the door, he had his hands visible, his posture non-threatening. "Miss Tucker, my name is William Booker. I'm not here to hurt you. I was Howard Rankin's partner." The color drained from her face. For a moment, William thought she might slam the door. Instead, she looked past him, scanning the street. "Are you alone?" "Yes." "How did you find me?" "Howard left notes. Before he died." Her eyes filled with tears. "He's dead?" "I was afraid of that. When he stopped calling to check on me, I knew something had gone wrong." "Can I come in? We need to talk." She hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. "Then you leave." The interior of her house was sparse but comfortable. No photos on the walls, nothing personal. The home of someone ready to run at a moment's notice. Vicky sat on the edge of her couch, hands clasped tight. "How did he die?" "I don't know the details yet. He disappeared 15 years ago. But I think they killed him because of what he knew. About Carol Taylor." She flinched at the name. "I can't help you. I'm sorry about Howard. He saved my life. But I can't get involved. Those women are still out there. Still being trafficked, still being sold. Howard died trying to stop it. And I'll die if I testify. They have people everywhere. Police, government, you name it." Her voice was bitter. "I went to the cops when I first escaped. They sent me to a detective named Dwayne Flynn. You know what he did? Called Taylor right in front of me. I barely got out of that station alive." William pulled out his phone and showed her the video Howard had made. Vicky watched with tears streaming down her face. "He was a good man," she whispered when it ended. "One of the only decent people I met in all that nightmare. Help me finish what he started. Tell me what happened to you." "Why? So you can get killed too." "I'm not Howard. I know these people are dangerous. But I also know how to fight them." William leaned forward. "I spent 15 years in military intelligence. I've taken down warlords and cartel bosses and terror cells. Carol Taylor is just another target. He has protection at the highest levels. Then we go around the system. We build a case so airtight that even his connections can't save him. We expose everything, the trafficking, the corruption, all of it. We make it too big to bury." Vicky was quiet for a long time. "If I help you, I want guarantees. Protection. A way out if this goes sideways. You have my word." "Your word." She laughed hollowly. "Howard gave me his word too. Look where that got him." William understood her fear. But he also saw something else in her eyes, a flicker of hope, of wanting to believe that justice was possible. "Tell me what happened," he said gently. "Start from the beginning." Vicky took a shuddering breath. "I was 23. Just graduated college, couldn't find work. I answered an ad for a receptionist position at one of Taylor's companies. Real estate development. The interview went well. They offered me the job on the spot. When did things change? My second day. They asked me to come to a warehouse to pick up some files. When I got there, 2 men grabbed me, threw me in a shipping container with 6 other women." Her voice went flat, the way trauma survivors dissociated from their memories. "We were there for 2 weeks. No light, barely any food or water. They moved us at night, drove us across the country. When they finally let us out, we were in some compound in the middle of nowhere. Where? I don't know. Desert, somewhere. Could have been Nevada or Arizona." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Taylor came to inspect us, like we were livestock. He picked 3 of us, said we'd be going to special clients. The others would go to brothels." William felt sick. "How did you escape?" "Luck. Stupid luck. They were moving me to the client, some tech billionaire who liked young blondes. The driver stopped at a gas station in Oregon. I managed to kick out the back window of the van and ran. Just ran until I thought my lungs would burst. Then you found Howard. 3 days later. I've been sleeping rough, trying to get as far from that place as I could. Howard was working a routine investigation at a truck stop, something unrelated. He saw me, saw I was in trouble. When I told him what happened, he believed me. Actually believed me. She smiled sadly. He got me to safety, gave me money, helped me build a new identity, told me to stay hidden while he investigated. He called me every week for 6 months. Then the calls stopped. He was getting too close. They killed him to shut him down. And now you want me to testify? To put a target on my back again? I want you to help me destroy them. William pulled out the files he'd photographed. Howard documented everything. Paper trail, shipping records, financial transactions. But what he didn't have was a witness. Someone who could testify to what happens in those warehouses, who could identify Taylor as the man running it all. There's a reason he didn't have that. Anyone who tried to testify would be dead before they reached a courtroom. Not if we do this smart. Not if we go public all at once, so big and so loud that killing you would just confirm the story. William showed her photos from Howard's board. Do you recognize any of these women? Vicky looked through them, her face pale. Her and her. They were in the container with me. And this one, she was at the compound. They said she'd been sold to someone in Seattle. Are any of them still alive? I don't know. I've been too afraid to look. Too afraid to do anything that might lead Taylor back to me. William understood. 15 years of looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. That was no way to live. What if I told you I have a way to bring Taylor down without you having to testify in court? At least not right away. Ow! By making him confess. By trapping him so completely that he has no choice but to admit what he's done. And recording every word. Vicky looked skeptical. Men like Taylor don't confess. They do when they think they're talking to someone they can trust. Someone who's part of the system. William smiled grimly. Howard taught me a lot about undercover work. I think it's time to use those skills. Chapter 5. The Network. William's friend from his Army days, Lee Wise, arrived in Portland 2 days later. Lee had left military intelligence a year before William started his own security consulting firm. He was the kind of man you wanted at your back in a firefight. Steady, smart, absolutely loyal. They met at a diner far from anywhere that mattered. Lee slid into the booth across from William, ordered coffee, then pulled out a tablet. I ran the names you sent me, Lee said. Carol Taylor is dirty as hell, but you already knew that. What you might not know is how extensive his network is. He showed William a diagram he'd built. Carol Taylor at the center. Lines connecting him to dozens of names. Frederick Kane is his right-hand man. Former cop turned head of security for Taylor's companies. He's the muscle, the fixer. Anything Taylor needs done that isn't strictly legal, Kane handles it. What about Detective Dwayne Flynn? Still with Portland PD, but he's been dirty for years. IA has looked at him 3 times, nothing ever stuck. He's careful, but I found financial records showing he owns a beach house in Mexico worth way more than a cop's salary. Taylor bought it for him. Through shell corporations, yeah? Flynn feeds Taylor information, makes cases disappear, generally runs interference for the operation. Lee scrolled through more files. But here's where it gets interesting. Flynn isn't the only cop on the payroll. I found at least 4 others in different jurisdictions. Taylor has a whole network of corrupt police feeding him information. William studied the names. He'd know if anyone started investigating him. Exactly, which is why Howard never got anywhere. Every time he tried to work with local authorities, Taylor knew about it before the ink dried on the report. What about federal? Here's the really bad news. Lee pulled up another photo. This is Ron Barry. He's a deputy director at the regional FBI office. And according to banking records I definitely didn't hack into, he's been receiving regular payments from one of Taylor's shell companies for 8 years. Jesus, how high does this go? I don't know, but high enough that taking Taylor down through official channels is suicide. Lee looked at William seriously. You need a different approach. Something they won't see coming. I've been thinking about that. William pulled out his laptop and showed Lee the plan he'd been developing. We don't go to the police. We don't go to the feds. We build our own case, gather our own evidence, and then we release everything at once. Every news outlet, every journalist, social media, everywhere. Make it too big to cover up. That's a good start. But Taylor will just deny everything, claim it's fabricated. Not if we have him on tape confessing. Lee raised an eyebrow. And how do you plan to make that happen? By giving him something he wants more than keeping his secrets. By making him think he's about to be caught and offering him a way out. William smiled coldly. People always talk when they think they're negotiating their escape. Over the next 2 weeks, William put his plan in motion. He created a false identity. A corrupt FBI agent named John DeLeon, who was willing to help Taylor escape prosecution in exchange for money. He built a backstory, created documents, even set up a fake FBI email address using social engineering tricks he'd learned in the Army. Then he had Lee drop hints through Taylor's network. Hints that this agent DeLeon had access to an ongoing investigation. Hints that he might be persuaded to look the other way. The bait was set. Now, they had to wait. Meanwhile, William wasn't idle. He tracked down 3 more women from Howard's list. Women who'd escaped Taylor's operation over the years. Each one told the same story. Lured in with promises of legitimate work. Kidnapped. Held in warehouses or compounds. Sold to clients around the country. One woman, Pearl Perkins, agreed to go on record. She was older now, in her 40s, had built a life in California. But she remembered everything. I'll testify, she told William over a video call. If you can guarantee my safety, I'll tell the world what that monster did to me. William added her statement to the growing file. Between Pearl, Vicky, and the 2 others, he had 4 witnesses. For women willing to speak out. He also tracked down other victims. Women who'd gone missing from Taylor's territory over the years. Some had never been found. Others had turned up dead, ruled as overdoses or accidents. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. In the 3rd week, Lee got a bite. Someone reached out, he said over the phone. Wants to set up a meeting with our fictional agent DeLeon. They didn't identify themselves, but they're using one of Taylor's secured email addresses. When and where? Tomorrow night. Industrial Park on the east side. They specified you come alone. Not a chance. You'll be there with surveillance equipment. Already planned on it. Lee paused. Will, these people are killers. This could be a trap. It probably is. That's why we're going to be ready. William spent the next day preparing. He wore a wire, a high-end military-grade device that would broadcast everything back to Lee. He carried his concealed weapon and made sure Lee knew to call the real police if things went south, corruption or not. The meeting was set for midnight at an abandoned warehouse. William drove there alone, parked in a lot, and walked to the specified door. It opened before he could knock. Frederick Kane stood there. He was a big man, 6'3", and built like someone who spent serious time in the gym. His face was scarred, and his eyes were the flat, dead eyes of a professional killer. Agent DeLeon, Kane said, Mr. Taylor is eager to meet you. The feeling's mutual. Kane patted William down, found the gun. I'll hold on to this. Fair enough. Inside, the warehouse was mostly empty. Concrete floor, metal walls, a few crates stacked in corners. In the center, under the only working light, sat Carol Taylor. He was exactly like his photos, silver hair, expensive suit, charming smile. He looked like someone's beloved grandfather, not a human trafficker. Agent DeLeon, Taylor said warmly, thank you for coming. I understand you have information about an investigation into my businesses. Williams sat across from him. I do, and I understand you're interested in making it go away. That depends on what you're asking. $5 million, paid to an offshore account. In exchange, the investigation gets misdirected. Evidence disappears. You walk away clean. Taylor studied him. That's a lot of money for a federal agent. You're asking a lot. Obstruction of justice, evidence tampering. I'm risking my career, my freedom. $5 million is the price. How do I know you're legitimate? That this isn't a setup? William pulled out fabricated documents, internal FBI memos, case files, surveillance photos. All forgeries, but high-quality ones. This is what they have so far. Testimony from 3 witnesses. Financial records. Shipping manifests. They're close, Mr. Taylor. Very close. Taylor's smile never wavered, but William saw tension around his eyes. These witnesses. Do you have names? I do. But that information costs extra. How much extra? Another $1 million. Per name. You're an expensive man, Agent De Leon. I'm a man who can make your problems disappear. That's worth any price. Taylor glanced at Frederick Kane, who nodded slightly. All right, let's say I'm interested. Walk me through exactly what happened to these witnesses. How did they end up talking to the FBI? This was the moment. William leaned back, keeping his voice casual. 2 of them escaped your operation years ago. Vicky Tucker and Pearl Perkins. They've been in hiding, but we found them. The third, Jasmine Olsen, was found dead 3 years ago. But before she died, she talked to a social worker who documented everything. Taylor's mask slipped for just a second. Rage flickered across his face before the charm returned. I'm not familiar with those names. Really? Because according to your own shipping records, all 3 women passed through your warehouses. Vicky Tucker in 2010, Pearl Perkins in 2008, Jasmine Olsen in 2009. Each one kidnapped, held prisoner, scheduled for sale to clients. This is absurd. I run legitimate businesses. Real estate, trucking, construction, and human trafficking. William kept his voice level professional. Come on, Mr. Taylor. We're past the point of denial. You want my help? You need to be straight with me. How does your operation work? Who's involved? Give me the full picture so I know what I'm burying. Taylor was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. You're not FBI. Excuse me. Real FBI would never lay it out like that. Never ask for a confession. Taylor nodded at Kane. Kill him. Chapter 6. Turnabout. Frederick Kane moved fast for a big man. But William had been expecting this. As Kane lunged, William threw himself backward, the chair crashing down. Kane's knife slashed through the space where William's throat had been a second before. William rolled, came up in a fighting stance. Lee! Now, he shouted. The warehouse doors burst open. Lee Wise came through with 4 men, all former military, all heavily armed. They spread out in a tactical formation. On the ground, Lee barked, all of you. Kane looked at Taylor, who gave a slight shake of his head. Kane dropped the knife and raised his hands. William stood slowly, facing Taylor. You're right. I'm not FBI, but I am the man who's going to destroy you. Taylor's smile was gone, replaced by cold calculation. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Howard Rankin's partner. That's who you're dealing with. Remember Howard? The man you murdered 15 years ago because he got too close to your operation. For the first time, Taylor looked uncertain. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Howard was investigating you. He had evidence, witnesses, the whole package. So you had him killed and buried the case. Just like you've buried everything else. Prove it. William pulled out his phone and hit play on Howard's video. Taylor watched his dead investigator lay out the entire operation, his face growing paler with each revelation. That's circumstantial, Taylor said when it ended. Nothing that would stand up in court. Maybe not on its own, but combined with testimony from 4 witnesses, shipping records, financial documents, and this. William tapped his chest where the wire was hidden. It's more than enough. You've been recording this? Every word, including the part where you ordered your man to kill me. That's conspiracy to commit murder. Along with the human trafficking, racketeering, corruption, you're looking at life in prison. Taylor stood slowly. You think you can take me down? I have connections you can't imagine. Judges, politicians, federal agents. Your recording will never see a courtroom. Who said anything about a courtroom? William pulled out his laptop and opened it. On the screen was a web page ready to publish. In about 5 minutes, this goes live on every major news outlet. The video, the documents, the witness statements, everything. By dawn, your name will be trending on social media. By noon, there won't be a person in the country who doesn't know what you are. You can't do that. It's libel. It's truth. And truth is an absolute defense. Taylor looked at Lee and his men, at William, back at the laptop. What do you want? Justice. For Howard. For all the women you destroyed. I want you to confess, on camera, to everything. Every detail of your operation. Every name of every person helping you. You do that. And maybe, I'll let you surrender to the authorities instead of releasing you to the court of public opinion. Never. Then I'll just publish what I have. and you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when one of your so-called friends will decide you're too much of a liability. William leaned in close. Or when one of your victims' families will find you. Because they will find you, Taylor. And when they do, your connections won't save you. Taylor's jaw clenched. He looked at Frederick Kane, who gave an almost imperceptible shrug. No way out. Fine, Taylor said through gritted teeth. But I want immunity. Full immunity for my testimony. You'll get exactly what you deserve. No more, no less. William set up his phone to record. For the next hour, Carol Taylor talked. He described how he'd built his trafficking operation over 2 decades. How he'd recruited corrupt cops and officials. How he'd moved women across the country like cargo. How he made millions selling human beings. He named names. Detective Dwayne Flynn. FBI Deputy Director Ron Barry. 3 judges. 2 congressmen. A senator. Dozens of clients who'd purchased women from him. And he admitted to ordering Howard Rankin's death. He wouldn't drop the investigation, Taylor said, his voice flat. I tried to warn him off. I tried to buy him off. When nothing worked, I had Kane take care of it. Rankin was drugged, driven to the mountains, shot. His body was buried where it'll never be found. Where? William demanded. I don't remember the exact location. Somewhere in the Cascades. Kane handled the details. William looked at Kane, who stared back with those dead eyes. I want the location. Go to hell, Kane said. Lee put a gun to Kane's head. My friend asked you a question. Kane rattled off coordinates. William wrote them down, his hand shaking with rage. All this time, Howard had been out there. His mother had spent 15 years not knowing where he was, whether he'd died quickly or slowly, whether he'd been alone. Now she would know. Now she could bring him home. When Taylor finished his confession, William stopped the recording. That's all I need. So what now? Now? William looked at Lee, who nodded. Now we call the real FBI. The ones not on your payroll. And you're going to tell them everything you just told me. You promised immunity. I lied, just like you've been lying for 20 years. William pulled out his phone and dialed. This is William Booker. I have Carol Taylor in custody, and he's just confessed to multiple counts of human trafficking, murder, and corruption. You're going to want to send a lot of agents. Chapter 7. The truth comes out. The FBI arrived in force. 20 agents, none of them from the Portland office. William had been careful about that. He'd called the headquarters in D.C., asked for the counter-trafficking division, and explained that he had evidence of corruption in the regional offices. They believed him, or at least they believed him enough to send a team. Special Agent Benny Hensley was in charge. He was a veteran investigator, late 50s, with a weary look of someone who'd seen too much darkness in the world. He listened to William's story without interrupting, watched the videos, reviewed the documents. Then he arrested Carol Taylor and Frederick Kane. This is good work, Hensley told William. Irregular as hell, completely outside proper procedures, but good. You should have come to us sooner. Your deputy director is on Taylor's payroll. I didn't know who to trust. Barry's been dirty for years. We've been building a case, but he was careful. This gives us what we need. Hensley handed back William's flash drive. Keep copies of everything. This is going to be a long investigation, and we'll need all the evidence we can get. What about the victims? The women Taylor trafficked. We'll find them. Now that we have names and locations, we can start the process. It'll take time. A lot of them are scattered across the country, and some... He trailed off. Some are dead, William finished. Yeah, some are dead, but the ones who survived deserve justice. They'll get it. Detective Dwayne Flynn was arrested at his home at 4 a.m. So was FBI Deputy Director Ron Barry. The other names Taylor had given up fell like dominoes over the next 48 hours. Judges, politicians, businessmen, all taken into custody. The media picked up the story within hours. By morning, Carol Taylor's name was everywhere. Cable news ran segments on the Modern Slavery Network. Social media exploded with outrage. Protesters gathered outside Taylor's various properties. William watched it all from his office, feeling a grim satisfaction. Taylor's empire was crumbling, his protection evaporating. No amount of money or connections could save him now. You did it, Jenny said, bringing him coffee. You brought them down. Howard did it. I just finished what he started. He'd be proud of you. William thought about that. Would Howard be proud? Or would he be angry that it had taken 15 years to get justice? That his mother had suffered all that time, not knowing? I need to call Laverne, William said. He drove to her house, a small, neat bungalow on the east side of Portland. She answered the door in a wheelchair now, the cancer taking its toll. But her eyes were as sharp as ever. It's done, William said. Taylor's in custody. He confessed to everything, including ordering Howard's murder. They're going to excavate the site where Cain buried him. You'll be able to bring your son home. Laverne was quiet for a long moment. Then tears began streaming down her weathered face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving me this before I died. You don't have to thank me. Howard earned this. You earned this. Will you come to the burial? When they find him? Of course. I'll be there. 3 days later, FBI forensic teams found Howard Rankin's remains exactly where Frederick Cain had indicated. He'd been shot twice in the head, execution style. The medical examiner confirmed he'd died quickly, at least. That was something. Laverne planned a military funeral. William helped with the arrangements. On a cold November morning, they buried Howard Rankin with full honors at Willamette National Cemetery. The ceremony was small, just Laverne, William, Jenny, Lee, and a handful of Howard's old Army buddies who'd made the trip. The honor guard folded the flag and presented it to Laverne. She held it close, her whole body shaking with grief. He's home now, William told her. He's finally home. Because of you. She reached up and took his hand. You gave me justice. You gave me peace. There's no way I can ever repay that. You already did. You trusted me to finish this. That was all the payment I needed. Chapter 8. The Trials. The trials began 6 months later. Carol Taylor faced 47 counts of human trafficking, 3 counts of murder, racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, and a dozen other charges. His attorneys tried every trick they could think of, suppressing evidence, claiming William had entrapped him, arguing the confession was coerced. None of it worked. The video of Taylor's confession was damning. The testimony from Vicky Tucker, Pearl Perkins, and the other survivors was heartbreaking and compelling. The documentary evidence Howard had collected, combined with what FBI investigators had uncovered, painted a picture of a trafficking network that had operated for 20 years. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Carol Taylor was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Frederick Cain got the same. Detective Dwayne Flynn, FBI Deputy Director Ron Barry, and the others received sentences ranging from 15 years to life. William attended every day of the trial. He watched Taylor's facade crumble, watched the charming businessman become a broken old man. He felt no pity. On the final day, as Taylor was led out of the courtroom in shackles, he looked at William. There was hatred in his eyes, but also something else. Defeat. The understanding that he'd lost everything. His freedom, his reputation, his carefully constructed empire. William stared back, expressionless. This was justice. This was what Howard had died for. After the trial, William met with the survivors. Vicky Tucker had found the courage to speak at the sentencing hearing. She told the judge about the 2 weeks in that shipping container, about the terror and hopelessness, about how Howard Rankin had saved her life, and how William had given her back her voice. Thank you, she said to William outside the courthouse, for not giving up, for believing us. You deserve to be believed. All of you did. Pearl Perkins hugged him, tears in her eyes. I've been waiting 15 years for this. I almost gave up hope. Hope is what keeps us human, William said. Never lose that. He visited Laverne one last time before she died. She was in hospice now, fading fast, but she was at peace. I saw him, she whispered. Last night, Howard came to me in a dream. He said to tell you thank you. He said you were the son he never had. William's throat tightened. He was the father I needed. He taught me everything that mattered. He chose well. You'll carry on his legacy. Laverne Sprague died 3 days later, quietly in her sleep. William arranged the funeral and ensured she was buried next to her son. Together at last. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. Life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything. William's PI business boomed. Turns out bringing down a major trafficking network was excellent advertising. He had more cases than he could handle, and he was selective now. Only cases that mattered. Only cases where he could make a real difference. Lee Wise became a full partner in the business. Together, they specialized in cases other investigators wouldn't touch. Cold cases, missing persons, victims of crimes that had been forgotten or buried. They used Howard's methods, meticulous documentation, following every lead, never giving up. 6 months after the trials ended, William got a call from Special Agent Hensley. "We've located 43 victims from Taylor's network," Hensley said. "Some are being reunited with families. Others are getting trauma counseling, job training, new identities if they need them. It's not enough. Nothing will ever be enough, but it's something." "What about the ones we didn't find?" "Still looking. Probably will be for years. But we have leads now, thanks to Taylor's confession. We'll keep digging." Howard would appreciate that. Rankin was a good agent. Good man. He deserved better than what happened to him. He got his justice in the end. That's something. Speaking of which, there's a ceremony next month at FBI headquarters. They're posthumously awarding Rankin the FBI star for his investigation work. His mother would have been proud. William's chest tightened. She would have been. "You should come." Accepted on his behalf. "I'll be there." The ceremony was formal and dignified. FBI Director Mohammed Burton presented the award to William on Howard's behalf, praising his dedication and sacrifice. William accepted it, thinking about his mentor, the man who'd taught him to see truth beneath lies, who'd shown him that integrity mattered more than career advancement. After the ceremony, William visited the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in D.C. He found a quiet spot and pulled out the leather jacket, the one that had started everything. He ran his hands over the worn leather, feeling the history in it. "I finished it," he said quietly. "I got them all. Taylor, Flynn, Barry, everyone. And we found you. Brought you home to your mother. She's with you now." The jacket didn't answer, of course, but William felt a sense of peace settle over him. He'd kept his promise. He'd finished what Howard started. That evening, William flew home to Portland. Jenny picked him up from the airport, and they drove to their house in comfortable silence. "How are you feeling?" she asked as they pulled into the driveway. "Tired, relieved, ready to focus on the future." "Good, because I have news." She turned to him with a smile. "I'm pregnant." William stared at her, stunned. We're having a baby, due in March." He pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling emotions wash over him. After all the darkness of the last year, after the death and justice and revenge, here was something pure and good. New life, a new beginning. "If it's a boy," William said, "I want to name him Howard." Jenny smiled through tears. "I think that's perfect." 6 months later, they welcomed Howard William Booker into the world. He had his mother's eyes and his father's determination. You could tell already, the way he gripped William's finger with surprising strength. William held his son and thought about the man he'd been named after. Howard Rankin had died fighting for justice, for victims who had no voice. And now his legacy would live on, not just in the trafficking network he'd helped dismantle, but in this new life. "I promise," William whispered to his sleeping son, "I'll teach you what he taught me. That truth matters. That justice matters. That we fight for those who can't fight for themselves. And that we never, ever give up." Baby Howard gurgled in his sleep, his tiny hand still gripping his father's finger. William stood at the window of the nursery, looking out at the city lights. The jacket hung in his office now, a reminder of where this had all started, of the Polaroid that had led him to Laverne, to the truth about Howard's death, to justice for dozens of victims. Sometimes the smallest things led to the biggest changes. A forgotten jacket in a thrift store. A photograph with 3 words written on the back. A grieving mother's 15-year wait. And a man determined to keep his promise. "Find me," the photo had said. William had found her, had found the truth, had found justice. And in the process, he'd found himself, the man Howard had always believed he could be. Outside, the city lived on. People went about their lives, most never knowing how close they'd come to the darkness that men like Carol Taylor had hidden in plain sight. But they were safer now. The monster had been caught. The victims had been freed. It wasn't a perfect ending. Some women would never be found. Some scars would never heal. Justice, William had learned, was rarely perfect. But it was something, and sometimes something was enough. William kissed his son's forehead and went to find his wife. They had a future to build, a life to live, and a legacy to honor. The jacket could rest now. Its job was done, and so finally was his. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Vincenzo Nielsen had built his empire from nothing. At 38, he owned Nielsen Security Consulting, a private military contractor that governments called when they needed problems solved quietly. His hands weren't clean. They never had been since his Marine days in Afghanistan. But they were steady, and that's what mattered in his line of work. The sprawling estate in Virginia horse country reflected his success. 20 acres, a main house that could accommodate visiting dignitaries, and a security system that would make the Pentagon envious. But for all his tactical brilliance in the field, Vincenzo had been blind to the war being waged in his own home. He'd met Bethany Christensen at a charity gala 5 years ago. She was 26 then, blonde, ambitious, and working as an event coordinator for Washington's elite. She'd played the part of the devoted wife perfectly, supportive of his work, gracious with his business associates, and seemingly thrilled when the twins, Marcus and Maya, were born 3 years ago. What Vincenzo hadn't known was that Bethany had been playing a longer game than any military operation he'd ever planned. The call came on a Tuesday while he was in Belgrade, finalizing a contract with the Serbian Defense Ministry. Vincenzo was in his hotel suite, reviewing intelligence reports, when his secure phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. "Is this Mr. Nielsen?" The voice was tired, strained. "Who's asking?" "This is Patricia Daniels, director of Little Scholars Daycare." "Mr. Nielsen, we have a situation. Your wife hasn't picked up Marcus and Maya in 5 days. We've been caring for them, but we need you to." The phone went dead in Vincenzo's hand, not from a dropped call, but from the ice that had suddenly filled his veins. He called Bethany's number immediately, straight to voicemail. Again, voicemail. Within 6 hours, Vincenzo was on his private jet back to Virginia, his mind already shifting into the cold, calculating mode that had kept him alive through 3 tours in hostile territory. Whatever was waiting for him at home, he'd handle it the way he handled all threats, methodically, completely, and without mercy. The house was empty when he arrived. Not just empty, abandoned. Bethany's clothes were gone, her jewelry box cleared out, even her favorite coffee mug missing from the kitchen. But her phone sat on the marble counter, and when Vincenzo picked it up, he found something that made his blood run colder than it had in any war zone. A voice memo, time-stamped from 5 days ago. "Being a mother is a prison. I never wanted kids, Vince. I never wanted any of this suburban nightmare. Troy and I are starting our new life in Costa Rica with the $3 million from our joint account. I'm done pretending to love children I never wanted, and I'm done pretending to love you. Troy." The name hit him like a sniper's bullet. Troy Leon, his business partner, his best friend since their Marine days, the man who'd stood as best man at his wedding and godfather to his children. Vincenzo replayed the message 3 times, memorizing every inflection, every pause. Then he deleted it and placed the phone exactly where he'd found it. By the time he retrieved Marcus and Maya from the daycare, making arrangements for a live-in nanny and explaining to the twins that mommy had to go away for a while, Vincenzo had already begun planning. Not just revenge, but something far more comprehensive. He spent the next week making calls, activating contacts across 3 continents. Former Black Ops specialists, financial forensics experts, surveillance teams that could track a grain of sand across a desert. Every favor he'd ever been owed, every professional courtesy he'd extended over the years, It was all being called in now. What he discovered made the betrayal even more complete. The affair had been going on for over a year. The $3 million they'd stolen was from accounts Bethany had slowly gained access to, transferring money in amounts small enough to avoid immediate detection. They'd planned this down to the last detail, including researching Costa Rica's extradition laws. They thought they were safe. They thought they'd won. They had no idea they'd just declared war on a man who'd spent his adult life learning how to destroy enemies without leaving fingerprints. Chapter 2. The hunt begins. Costa Rica's banking laws were famously secretive, but Vincenzo had worked with men who could crack Swiss accounts with nothing but a laptop and enough motivation. Finding Troy and Bethany took exactly 68 hours. They were living in a luxury villa in Manuel Antonio, complete with infinity pool and ocean views. The property was rented under false names, paid for with cash transfers that would have been untraceable to anyone who wasn't a former military intelligence officer with unlimited resources and absolutely no scruples. Vincenzo's first asset on the ground was Tanner Jensen, a former Navy SEAL who now ran consulting services throughout Central America. Tanner's official business was providing security for American companies operating in volatile regions. His unofficial business was whatever paid well and didn't ask too many questions. They're living like royalty, Tanner reported during their first encrypted video call. New cars, expensive restaurants, the works. Your wife's been telling people she's a widow who inherited her husband's defense contracting business. Vincenzo studied the surveillance photos on his screen. Bethany lounged by the pool in a designer bikini, a drink in her hand and a smile on her face that he'd never seen during their marriage. Beside her, Troy looked relaxed in a way that made Vincenzo's jaw clench. His former best friend appeared younger, happier, as if stealing another man's life had somehow rejuvenated him. What's their routine? Vincenzo asked. Predictable. Beach in the mornings, expensive dinners, casino twice a week. They're not hiding. They think they're untouchable. But Vincenzo wasn't planning to simply expose them or drag them back to face American justice. That would be too clean, too legal, too quick. What they'd done wasn't just theft and adultery. It was abandonment of children, betrayal of brotherhood, and the complete destruction of everything he'd built and believed in. That required a more personal response. Phase 1 of Vincenzo's plan was already in motion. Back in Virginia, he'd hired Michelle Manning, a former FBI financial crimes investigator, to trace every dollar of the stolen money. Not to recover it. That was secondary, but to map their entire financial network. Every account, every transaction, every vulnerability in their new life. Phase 2 involved Oscar Davenport, psychological operations specialist Vincenzo had worked with in Afghanistan. Oscar's job was to study everything about Troy and Bethany's new personas, their psychological profiles, their fears and weaknesses. She's telling people she's writing a novel, Oscar reported. Something about her life as a military contractor's wife. Very dramatic, very victimized. She's positioned herself as the brave woman who escaped an abusive husband. And Troy, he's playing the supportive boyfriend, but there are cracks. He's gambling more than he can afford, drinking heavily. Your partner's got demons, Vince. The kind that eat a man alive if you know how to feed them. Vincenzo smiled for the first time since returning from Belgrade. Good. Demons are useful. While his team gathered intelligence, Vincenzo began establishing his own presence in Costa Rica. Not directly. He was too smart for that, but through a web of shell companies and false identities that would let him operate invisibly in their new paradise. He purchased properties, hired local assets, and began constructing what he privately called the maze, a complex trap that would systematically destroy every aspect of the new life Troy and Bethany had stolen his money to build. The beauty of the plan wasn't its complexity, but its inevitability. Once set in motion, it would unfold with the inexorable precision of a military operation, each phase triggering the next until his targets found themselves exactly where he wanted them, broken, desperate, and completely at his mercy. By the end of his first month of planning, Vincenzo had filled 3 encrypted files with surveillance reports, financial analyses, and operational blueprints. Marcus and Maya were adjusting well to their new nanny, a former CIA operative who could protect them while maintaining the cover of a graduate student in child development. Everything was in place. It was time to remind his wife and his former best friend that some betrayals carry consequences that last a lifetime. Chapter 3. The First Dominoes. 3 months after Bethany and Troy's escape to paradise, their new life began to unravel in ways so subtle they didn't recognize the pattern until it was far too late. It started with Giuseppe Blackwell, a charming American expat who'd recently moved to Manuel Antonio. Giuseppe was handsome, well-connected, and claimed to be a tech entrepreneur who'd sold his company and was now living the dream in Costa Rica. He frequented the same restaurants and casino where Troy and Bethany spent their evenings. What they didn't know was that Giuseppe was actually one of Vincenzo's contractors, a former psychological operations specialist whose real name was classified at a level that didn't officially exist. The target couple is exactly as predictable as the files indicated, Giuseppe reported during his first week of contact. The woman craves validation and attention. The man is paranoid, but hiding it behind alcohol and increasingly reckless gambling. Giuseppe's approach was masterful. He befriended them gradually, becoming the kind of charming acquaintance who made their social circle feel more legitimate, more sophisticated. He introduced them to other expatriates, all of whom were either Vincenzo's assets or carefully vetted locals who could be trusted to play their parts. Within 6 weeks, Troy and Bethany considered Giuseppe one of their closest friends in Costa Rica. He knew their schedules, their habits, their fears, and most importantly, their secrets. She's already confided that they're not really married, Giuseppe reported. Says she's waiting for her divorce to be finalized. And your former partner is more paranoid than we thought. He's convinced someone's been watching them. Is he right? Vincenzo asked. Absolutely. But he'll never spot our people. He's military, but he's thinking like a soldier when he should be thinking like prey. The psychological pressure began with small things. Subtle surveillance that Troy would occasionally notice but never quite confirm. A rental car that appeared to follow them for a few blocks before turning away. Phone calls with no one on the line. Credit card transactions that were charged twice, then immediately refunded with no explanation. Each incident was minor enough to dismiss individually, but together they created a growing sense of unease that began to poison the paradise Troy and Bethany had bought with Vincenzo's money. Meanwhile, back in Virginia, Vincenzo was building the legal framework for his revenge. Through a network of shell companies, he'd acquired the deed to the villa Troy and Bethany were renting. He now owned their home without them knowing it. He'd also traced every penny of his stolen money and begun a careful campaign of financial disruption. Their Costa Rican bank accounts were flagged for suspicious activity reviews that would freeze their assets for weeks at a time. Credit cards were canceled due to algorithmic security concerns. Investment accounts were subjected to compliance audits that tied up their funds indefinitely. They're burning through their accessible cash faster than expected, Michelle Manning reported. The stress is making them careless with money. The woman's been shopping compulsively, and the man's gambling losses are accelerating. But the most devastating blow came through Giuseppe, who had gradually introduced them to what he called investment opportunities in the Costa Rican real estate market. These were sophisticated cons that existed only on paper, designed to separate Troy and Bethany from even more of their stolen money, while creating legal complications that would make their lives increasingly complicated. They've invested $800,000 in the development project, Giuseppe reported after 2 months of cultivation. They think they're going to triple their money in 6 months. Of course, the development project existed only in the fictional documents that Giuseppe's team had created. The money had been transferred to accounts that Vincenzo controlled, meaning he was slowly recovering his stolen funds while his targets dug themselves deeper into a hole of their own making. By the end of Phase 2, Troy's paranoia had escalated to the point where he was drinking heavily and starting fights in bars. Bethany was showing signs of severe stress, weight loss, insomnia, and an increasing dependence on prescription medication that Giuseppe had helpfully connected her with through a corrupt local doctor. Their relationship was fracturing under the pressure. The romantic adventure that had seemed so perfect 3 months earlier was now plagued by arguments, suspicion, and the growing realization that their new life wasn't as secure as they believed. "She's been asking questions about returning to the States," Giuseppe reported. "Mentions missing her children more frequently. The target is weakening." Vincenzo's response was swift and merciless. If Bethany wanted to think about their children, he'd give her something to really think about. The next phase would transform her guilt into agony, and her lover's paranoia into pure terror. Because they were about to learn that paradise could become hell with just the right kind of pressure applied by someone who understood exactly how to break human beings without leaving marks that showed. The real revenge was just beginning. Chapter 4: Paradise Lost. 6 months after fleeing to Costa Rica, Troy and Bethany's stolen paradise had become a gilded prison, though they didn't yet understand the bars were of Vincenzo's making. The morning everything changed started like any other. They were having breakfast on the villa's terrace when Giuseppe arrived with news that would shatter what remained of their peace of mind. "I have some disturbing information," Giuseppe said, his face grave as he accepted the coffee Bethany offered. "About your situation back in the States." Troy looked up from his tablet, where he'd been obsessively checking news sites for any mention of their names. "What kind of information?" "It's about your children, Bethany, and your husband's investigation into your disappearance." Bethany's hand trembled as she set down her cup. Over the past month, she'd been having increasingly frequent nightmares about Marcus and Maya. Giuseppe's contacts had been feeding her carefully crafted stories about Vincenzo's behavior since her departure. How cold he'd become with the children, how they'd been asking for their mother. All eyes, of course. The twins were thriving under the care of their highly qualified nanny and had video calls with their father every day. But Bethany didn't know that. "What about them?" she whispered. Giuseppe pulled out a tablet and showed them a series of photographs. The images appeared to show Vincenzo meeting with serious-looking men in expensive suits. Other photos showed official-looking documents, computer screens with financial data, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment. "He's hired private investigators, military-grade contractors, from what my sources tell me. They've been tracing every transaction you made before leaving the country." This was partially true. Vincenzo had indeed hired investigators, but they were his own employees, and the investigation was complete. What Giuseppe was showing them now was an elaborate piece of theater designed to trigger Troy's paranoia. "How much do they know?" Troy asked, his voice tight. "Everything. Your accounts here, your false identities, even this villa. My contact says they're building a case that will involve not just theft, but kidnapping charges for taking Bethany across international borders." "Kidnapping." Bethany stood abruptly. "I left willingly. I left a message." "Doesn't matter," Giuseppe said gravely. "With children involved, the FBI can make that charge stick. And kidnapping across international borders is a federal offense. 20 years minimum." Troy was studying the photos with the trained eye of a former Marine, but Giuseppe's team had done their work well. Every detail was convincing, from the authentic-looking federal documents to the staged surveillance photos. "There's more," Giuseppe continued. "Your husband has been in contact with Costa Rican authorities. He has serious connections here, military contractors, government officials. They're preparing extradition paperwork." This was the key moment in Vincenzo's psychological operation. For 6 months, he'd been applying pressure, creating stress, making Troy and Bethany feel increasingly vulnerable. Now he was offering them exactly what desperate people always reach for: a solution. "What do you suggest?" Troy asked. "You need to disappear. Really disappear this time. I have connections who can help, but it won't be cheap and it won't be comfortable." Over the next week, Giuseppe laid out an elaborate escape plan. They would need to leave Costa Rica immediately, moving to a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. He had contacts who could arrange new identities, safe passage, and secure housing. The cost would be everything they had left. $2 million, Giuseppe said during their final meeting. That covers transportation, documentation, housing for the first year, and protection from Vincenzo's investigators. Troy and Bethany looked at each other across the villa's living room. the same room where they'd celebrated their successful escape just 6 months earlier. Now it felt like a trap closing around them. "We don't have $2 million in accessible funds," Troy said. "The real estate investment," Bethany began, "won't mature for months. And from what I'm hearing, you don't have months." Giuseppe leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but urgent. "There is another option. I have a contact who might be willing to buy your story." "Our story?" "Think about it. American military contractor's wife flees abusive marriage with his business partner. International manhunt. Hidden money. Romance in paradise. It's got everything publishers love." The book deal Giuseppe proposed was too good to be true, which made it perfect bait for people who'd spent months watching their careful plans unravel. A major publishing house was allegedly interested in Bethany's memoir of escaping her marriage to a dangerous man. The advance would be exactly enough to fund their escape to a safe haven. Bethany spent 3 days writing frantically, pouring out a fictional account of her marriage that painted Vincenzo as a controlling, possibly abusive husband and herself as a victim who'd finally found the courage to escape with the help of Troy's love and protection. Every word was exactly what Vincenzo had expected. The narrative revealed not just her complete lack of remorse, but her stunning ability to rewrite history, to cast herself as the victim of the life she'd voluntarily destroyed. When Giuseppe delivered the contract and the check for $2 million, Troy and Bethany felt the first relief they'd experienced in months. They had no way of knowing the money was their own. Funds Vincenzo had recovered from their failed investments, now being returned to them as part of an elaborate shell game designed to give them just enough hope to make their ultimate fall even more devastating. As they prepared for their next escape, Vincenzo was already 3 moves ahead, preparing the final phase of his revenge. Soon, Troy and Bethany would find themselves exactly where he wanted them, completely isolated, utterly dependent on his mercy, and finally ready to face the full consequences of their betrayal. The paradise they'd stolen was about to become the hell they deserved. Chapter 5. The Perfect Trap. The escape route Giuseppe provided led Troy and Bethany to a remote compound in the mountains of Guatemala, far from extradition treaties and international oversight. The location was sold to them as the perfect safe house, isolated, secure, and completely off the grid. What they didn't realize was that the compound belonged to Vincenzo. The facility had originally been built as a training center for private military contractors, complete with secure communications, defensive positions, and most importantly, no way in or out without authorization. To Troy and Bethany, it looked like salvation. To Vincenzo, it was the perfect prison. Their host was introduced as Faustino Weeks, a former DEA agent who now provided security services for people who needed to stay hidden. Faustino was welcoming but professional, explaining the compound's rules with military precision. No outside communications without approval. No leaving the compound without escort. No contact with anyone from your previous life. These rules aren't negotiable. They're what keep you alive. Troy and Bethany accepted these restrictions readily. After months of feeling hunted, the compound felt like a fortress where they could finally breathe again. They had no idea they were breathing Vincenzo's air. For 2 weeks, Vincenzo let them settle into a routine. The compound was comfortable enough, good food, entertainment systems, even a small library. He wanted them relaxed, confident, feeling safe enough to let their guard down completely. Meanwhile, he was finalizing the most crucial elements of his plan. Back in Virginia, Marcus and Maya had been told their mother was sick and needed to be in a special hospital for a while. It was close enough to the truth. The twins were thriving under their nanny's care and had begun calling her Aunt Sarah with the easy affection of children who'd always been more resilient than the adults around them. Vincenzo called them every night, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories, maintaining the stability that Bethany had abandoned when she chose her freedom over their welfare. "Daddy, when is Mommy coming home?" Maya asked her in one of their video calls. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise you'll always be safe with me." It was a promise he intended to keep. And part of keeping that promise meant ensuring that the people who'd abandoned his children understood the full cost of their choices. At the compound, Vincenzo's psychological operation entered its final phase. The first crack appeared when Giuseppe arrived for what he called a routine security check. His manner was different now, less friendly, more businesslike. "We have a problem," he announced to Troy and Bethany in the compound's main room. "Vincenzo's people have traced your financial transactions. They know about the book deal." Bethany went pale. "How is that possible?" "The publisher had to file certain paperwork. International money transfers, copyright documentation. Your husband has resources you never imagined." Giuseppe's revelation was devastating. Their location was compromised. Vincenzo's contractors were closing in, and they had perhaps days before the compound was discovered. "What are our options?" Troy asked, his military training warring with the panic that was starting to show in his eyes. "Limited. We can move you again, but it will cost everything you have left." And honestly, Giuseppe's expression was grim. "I'm not sure there's anywhere on earth you can hide from man like Vincenzo Nielsen." That night, Troy and Bethany lay awake in their comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the Guatemalan jungle outside their window. For the first time since leaving Virginia, they were forced to confront the possibility that their escape had been nothing more than a temporary reprieve. "Maybe we should consider going back," Bethany whispered. "Face the charges. At least in American prison, we'd be safe." "Safe?" Troy's laugh was bitter. "You don't know your husband like I do. Prison won't protect us from him. Nothing will." What neither of them realized was that their conversation was being recorded. Every word, every expression of fear and regret was being captured by surveillance equipment woven throughout the compound. Vincenzo reviewed the recordings from his office in Virginia, studying his target's psychological deterioration with the same analytical precision he'd once applied to enemy combatants. They were almost ready. The next morning brought what appeared to be salvation in the form of an unexpected visitor. Henry Walls introduced himself as a representative of the International Justice Foundation, a human rights organization that helped people escape persecution. "We've been monitoring your situation," Henry explained to Troy and Bethany in the compound's meeting room. "The IJF has concerns about the legality of the charges being prepared against you. We believe you may be victims of a vindictive pursuit that goes beyond legitimate justice." Henry's offer was everything they'd hoped for: legal protection, legitimate documentation, and relocation to a country where they could rebuild their lives under IJF protection. There was just one condition. The IJF requires complete transparency from the people we help. You'll need to participate in a formal interview process, documenting your experiences and the circumstances that led to your current situation. The interview would be conducted by trained psychologists and legal experts. It would be recorded for potential use in international court proceedings. And it would require Troy and Bethany to confess, in detail, everything they'd done. As Henry outlined the process, Troy felt something nagging at the edge of his consciousness. There was something familiar about the man's voice, his mannerisms, something that triggered old memories from his military days. But desperation made him ignore his instincts. They both agreed to the interviews immediately. What they didn't know was that Henry Walls was actually Alan Doherty, another of Vincenzo's contractors. The International Justice Foundation existed only on paper, and the interviews they were about to give would provide Vincenzo with everything he needed to complete his revenge. As they prepared for what they believed would be their salvation, Troy and Bethany had no idea they were about to confess their crimes to the very man they betrayed. The trap was perfect, and it was closing. Chapter 6: Confessions and Consequences. The interview room of the compound was set up to look like a professional legal facility. Cameras in plain sight, official-looking documents, and an atmosphere of bureaucratic legitimacy that made Troy and Bethany feel they were finally dealing with legitimate authorities. Alan Doherty, still playing his role as Henry Walls from the International Justice Foundation, sat across from them with a team of legal experts who were actually Vincenzo's psychological operations specialists. "Before we begin," Alan said, "I need to emphasize that everything you say here is protected by international humanitarian law. You're under IJF protection now, which means complete honesty is not just advisable, it's required." What followed was 6 hours of the most detailed confession Vincenzo could have hoped for. Troy spoke first, his military bearing gradually crumbling as he described the systematic betrayal of his best friend. He explained how the affair had started, how they'd planned a theft, how they'd researched countries with favorable extradition laws. Vincenzo trusted me with everything, Troy said, his voice hollow. Financial access, operational security, even his family. I used all of it against him. But it was Bethany's confession that provided the emotional devastation Vincenzo had been seeking. I never wanted children, she said, the words coming out in a rush once she started talking. Everyone expected me to be this perfect military wife and mother, but I hated every minute of it. The twins were like anchors dragging me down into a life I never chose. Alan leaned forward slightly. Can you elaborate on your relationship with your children? I love them in the abstract, I guess. But the day-to-day reality? The crying, the demands, the constant need for attention? I felt trapped, like I was suffocating. And leaving them, Bethany's composure finally broke. I knew it was wrong, but I also knew that if I didn't leave then, I never would. Troy made me feel alive again, made me remember who I was before I became just Vincenzo's wife and the twins' mother. Alan's next question was the one Vincenzo had specifically requested. Do you regret your decision? I regret hurting my children, Bethany said carefully. But I don't regret saving myself. I was dying in that life, slowly disappearing into someone else's expectations. For Vincenzo, watching the recording later in his Virginia office, that answer crystallized everything he needed to know about the woman he'd married. She regretted hurting the twins, but not abandoning them. She regretted the consequences, but not the betrayal itself. Any microscopic part of him that might have been willing to forgive died in that moment. The interviews continued for 3 days, with Alan's team extracting every detail of Troy and Bethany's crimes, their current mental state, and their future plans. By the end, they provided enough evidence to convict themselves in any court in the world. But courts were no longer Vincenzo's plan. On the final day of the interviews, Alan delivered what appeared to be wonderful news. The IJF has approved your case for full protection. We'll be moving you to our secure facility in Switzerland within the week. You'll have new identities, financial support, and complete protection from any pursuit. Troy and Bethany cried with relief. After 9 months of running, hiding, and living in fear, they finally saw a path to genuine safety. That night, they celebrated with a bottle of expensive wine that Faustino provided, toasting their survival and the new life that awaited them in Europe. They woke up 12 hours later in a very different kind of facility. The room was sterile, white, with no windows and only one door. They were lying on simple cots, still wearing the clothes they'd fallen asleep in, but everything else had changed. Troy was the first to fully wake up, his military training helping him assess the situation quickly. They were in some kind of medical facility, but not a hospital. The walls were soundproof, the door was reinforced steel, and there were cameras in every corner. Bethany, he said urgently, shaking her awake. We need to get out of here. As consciousness fully returned, they both realized they'd been moved while unconscious. The wine had been drugged, and they were now somewhere completely different. The door opened, and a figure they hadn't seen in almost a year walked in. Vincenzo Nielsen looked exactly as they remembered. Tall, lean, with the kind of calm presence that had once made Troy feel safe and Bethany feel protected. Now, that same presence felt like a predator studying prey. "Hello, wife," he said to Bethany, his voice conversational. "Troy." The silence stretched for long moments as the reality of their situation settled over them. "Ow," Troy finally managed. "Did you really think you could steal my life and disappear without consequences?" Vincenzo pulled up a chair and sat down, completely relaxed. "Every person you trusted, every safe house you hid in, every escape route you took, I provided all of it." He gestured around the room. "Welcome to my private medical facility. Completely isolated, absolutely secure, and entirely off any official records. You wanted to disappear from the world, and now you have." Bethany found her voice. "The children are perfectly fine. Better than fine, actually. They've stopped asking about you. The words hit her like physical blows. Vincenzo continued in the same calm tone. They're happy, healthy, and learning that some people who claim to love you will abandon you when something better comes along. It's a valuable life lesson. Vince, Troy started. We can explain. Explain. Vincenzo's laugh was genuinely amused. Troy, I have 6 hours of recorded confessions. I know exactly what you did, why you did it, and how you feel about it. Explanations are unnecessary. He stood up and walked to the door. The good news is that you'll have plenty of time to think about your choices. This facility is self-sufficient, completely isolated, and staffed by people who understand that some guests check in but never check out. As he reached the door, Vincenzo turned back one final time. You stole my money, destroyed my family, and abandoned my children. Now you get to experience what it feels like to lose everything and have nowhere to run. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Troy and Bethany alone in their white room with the full understanding that their escape had been an illusion from the very beginning. Vincenzo Nielsen had never been hunting them. He'd been hurting them. Chapter 7. The Price of Betrayal. The facility where Troy and Bethany found themselves imprisoned was a masterpiece of psychological torture disguised as medical care. Everything about it was designed to break down their sanity while maintaining the pretense of humane treatment. Dr. Sandy Boyer, the facility's chief psychiatrist, was actually a former CIA interrogation specialist who'd helped design psychological pressure techniques that left no physical evidence. Her official role was to provide therapy for the facility's patients. Her actual job was to systematically dismantle Troy and Bethany's mental defenses. Good morning, Dr. Boyer said cheerfully as she entered their shared room for the first session. I'm here to help you process the trauma of your recent experiences. The sessions began immediately, twice daily, mandatory and recorded. Dr. Boyer was skilled at appearing sympathetic while asking questions designed to force Troy and Bethany to confront the full scope of their actions. Let's talk about the children, she said during their third session. Marcus and Maya, how do you think they're processing their mother's abandonment? Bethany's attempts to rationalize her choices crumbled under Dr. Boyer's relentless, clinically precise questioning. Every justification was dissected, every excuse was challenged, until the raw truth of what she'd done became impossible to escape. I convinced myself they'd be better off without me, Bethany finally admitted, tears streaming down her face. But that was just selfish justification, wasn't it? What do you think? Dr. Boyer asked. The facility's routine was designed to amplify their psychological isolation. They were allowed to see each other, but their relationship, already strained by months of stress, began deteriorating rapidly under the pressure. Troy's military training made him more resistant to the psychological pressure, but it also made him more aware of what was happening to them. He recognized the techniques being used, understood that they were being systematically broken down. This is psychological warfare, he told Bethany during one of their brief moments alone. Vince is using everything he learned in the Marines against us. What do? We survive. We wait for an opportunity. But opportunities were exactly what Vincenzo had designed the facility to eliminate. Meanwhile, back in Virginia, Vincenzo was settling into a new rhythm with his children. Marcus and Maya had adapted to their mother's absence with the resilience of childhood, especially with the steady presence of their nanny and the careful way Vincenzo had explained the situation. Daddy, Marcus asked one evening as Vincenzo tucked him into bed, is Mommy ever coming back? I don't know, son, but I promise you'll always have me, and I'll never leave you. It was a promise that gave Vincenzo's revenge its moral foundation. His children deserved better than parents who would abandon them for personal gratification. They deserved stability, love, and protection from the kind of selfish adults who put their own desires above their children's welfare. At the facility, the psychological pressure was reaching its intended crescendo. Dr. Boyer's sessions had evolved from general therapy to focused confrontation with specific betrayals. She had transcripts of every conversation Troy and Bethany had recorded during their months in hiding, including their most private moments. Let's discuss this conversation you had in Costa Rica. Dr. Boyer said, reading from transcript. You said, the kids will get over it. They're young. They'll adapt. Bethany's face went white. You were recording us the entire time? Since the day you left Virginia. Every word, every decision, every moment you chose your own comfort over your children's welfare. The recordings were devastating because they captured Troy and Bethany's complete lack of remorse during their months of hiding. They'd lived in luxury, celebrated their successful escape, and rarely mentioned the children they'd abandoned except to dismiss their importance. Listen to yourselves, Dr. Boyer said, playing audio of them laughing on a Costa Rican beach. Children wondering where their mother disappeared to, and you're ordering another round of drinks. Troy finally snapped during his individual session on the 10th day. What does he want? He shouted at Dr. Boyer. What's the endgame here? We get it. We're pieces of shit who ruined everything. What more does he need? Mr. Nielsen doesn't want anything from you, Dr. Boyer replied calmly. He's simply ensuring you understand the full consequences of your choices. This is illegal. Kidnapping, false imprisonment. Is it? You came here voluntarily, seeking help from what you believed was a humanitarian organization. You signed documents requesting protective custody. As far as any official records show, you're exactly where you asked to be. The legal trap was as perfect as the physical one. Vincenzo had used their own desperation against them, making them complicit in their own imprisonment. But the real psychological blow came when Dr. Boyer showed them current footage of Marcus and Maya. The children were playing in their backyard, laughing and building a fort with their nanny. They looked happy, healthy, and completely untroubled by their mother's absence. Children are remarkably resilient, Dr. Boyer observed as Bethany sobbed, watching her children playing without her, especially when the source of instability is removed from their environment. They don't miss me at all, Bethany whispered. Should they? You made your choice clear when you abandoned them. Children understand actions better than adults understand consequences. That night, Troy and Bethany held each other in their sterile room, both of them finally understanding that Vincenzo's revenge wasn't designed to kill them. It was designed to make them live with the full weight of what they'd done, completely isolated from any possibility of redemption or escape. And they were beginning to realize that might be worse than death. Chapter 8, Breaking Point. 3 weeks into their captivity, Troy and Bethany's relationship finally shattered under the pressure of Dr. Boyer's relentless psychological dissection. The breaking point came during a joint session when Dr. Boyer introduced a new element to their therapy: accountability assignments. Today, we're going to explore the concept of responsibility, she announced, placing 2 files on the table between them. I want each of you to write a detailed letter to Marcus and Maya, explaining your decision to abandon them. We're not writing anything, Troy said immediately. Of course you are. These letters are part of your therapeutic process. Whether you choose to be honest with yourselves and your children is up to you. The assignment was diabolical in its simplicity. Either they would write genuine letters that forced them to confront the full scope of their betrayal, or they would write self-serving justifications that revealed their continued selfishness. Either way, Dr. Boyer would have them. Bethany broke first. After 2 days of staring at blank paper, she began writing a letter that started as an attempt at explanation and devolved into desperate self-justification. My darling children, the letter began, Mommy had to leave because Daddy made her very unhappy. Dr. Boyer read the letter aloud during their next session, her clinical voice making every word sound even more pathetic. So your position is that your children should understand that their mother abandoned them because their father wasn't meeting your emotional needs. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you wrote. You're asking 3-year-old children to excuse your abandonment because your husband didn't make you happy enough. Troy's letter was shorter, but equally revealing. He'd attempted to frame their escape as a noble act of love, claiming they'd left to protect the children from what he called a toxic environment. Interesting perspective, Dr. Boyer said after reading his letter. You stole $3 million, committed adultery with your best friend's wife, and abandoned 2 toddlers, but you characterized this as protecting them. We were protecting them from the fallout of your own crimes. You created the toxic environment, then abandoned the children to deal with it alone. The letter assignment became the catalyst for Troy and Bethany to turn on each other. "This is your fault," Bethany screamed at Troy during one of their increasingly frequent arguments. "You convinced me we could get away with it. You said Vince would never find us. I convinced you." Troy's laugh was bitter. "You were ready to leave the moment I showed interest. You were looking for any excuse to abandon your family. At least I was trapped in a marriage I never wanted. What's your excuse? Vince was your best friend, and you betrayed him for what? For me? Look how well that worked out." Their arguments were recorded, analyzed, and played back to them during individual sessions. Dr. Boyer used their own words to demonstrate how quickly they'd abandoned any pretense of love or loyalty when faced with pressure. "This is what you're made of," she told them separately. "When things get difficult, you betray whoever is closest to you. Your husband and children. Each other. It's a pattern." By the fourth week, both Troy and Bethany were showing signs of severe psychological breakdown. They'd stopped speaking to each other except to trade accusations. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by nightmares about their children. Food became tasteless. The facility's medical staff monitored their vital signs constantly, ensuring they remained physically healthy while their mental state deteriorated to precisely calibrated levels. Dr. Boyer's sessions became the only human contact that didn't involve mutual recrimination, making them psychologically dependent on their tormentor for basic social interaction. "I want to see my children," Bethany begged during one session. "Please, just a video call. I need to tell them I'm sorry." "Sorry for what, specifically?" "For leaving them. For choosing myself over them. For being a terrible mother. And if you could see them, what would you say? That I love them. That I made a mistake. That I want to come home and be a better mother." Dr. Boyer's response was devastating in its simplicity. "But you don't want to come home to be a better mother. You want to come home because you're miserable here. If you were happy with your new life, you wouldn't be thinking about your children at all. Just like you didn't think about them when you were happy in Costa Rica." The truth of this statement hit Bethany like a physical blow. Her remorse wasn't genuine transformation. It was self-pity dressed up as maternal love. Troy's breakdown followed a different pattern. His military training helped him resist the direct psychological pressure, but it also made him hypersensitive to the strategic nature of their situation. "He's not going to let us go," he told Bethany during one of their last civil conversations. "This isn't temporary punishment. This is permanent. You don't know that. I know Vince. I trained with him, fought beside him, lived in his house. He doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. We're never leaving this place." The realization that their imprisonment might be permanent sent Troy into a spiral of rage and despair that culminated in him attacking the cameras in their room with his bare hands. The security response was swift and professional. Troy was sedated, restrained, and moved to an isolation cell where he could calm down without endangering anyone. When he was returned to the shared room 3 days later, his spirit was completely broken. "I betrayed my best friend," he said to Bethany, his voice hollow. "I helped destroy his family. I abandoned children who call me Uncle Troy. And for what? For you? For money? For some fantasy of freedom? Don't put this all on me. No, you're right. It's not all on you. I made my choices. I knew what I was doing was wrong. And I did it anyway, because I wanted what I wanted more than I cared about what was right." Their final conversation was a litany of mutual recrimination and self-loathing that Dr. Boyer recorded for Vincenzo's review. By the end of the 8th week, both Troy and Bethany had been reduced to broken shells of their former selves, finally understanding the true scope of their betrayal and the permanence of their situation. They'd wanted to escape their responsibilities and start fresh somewhere else. Instead, they discovered that some betrayals create consequences that last forever. Chapter 9. Justice Served. 6 months after Troy and Bethany had been declared legally dead following a staged boating accident in Costa Rica, Vincenzo sat in his Virginia office reviewing the final reports from their psychological evaluation. Dr. Boyer's assessment was clinical and complete. Both subjects had achieved full acknowledgement of their crimes and their consequences. They understood what they'd done, why it was wrong, and why their punishment was permanent. They were ready for the final phase. Vincenzo had spent the months since their capture rebuilding his life around his children. Marcus and Maya were thriving in their stable environment, showing no lasting psychological damage from their mother's abandonment. They'd stopped asking about her entirely and had begun calling their nanny Mom Sandy, with Vincenzo's encouragement. The twins deserved a mother figure who would never abandon them. But before Vincenzo could fully close this chapter of his life, there were final arrangements to be made. The facility where Troy and Bethany were held operated under the cover of an experimental treatment center for individuals suffering from severe dissociative disorders. The patients were isolated from society for their own protection and the protection of others. It was a convenient fiction that explained why they could never leave and why no one would ever try to find them. Mr. Nielsen, Dr. Boyer said as she entered his office for their final meeting, "Your subjects have completed their therapeutic process. Their psychological state? Completely compliant. They understand their situation and accept it. Subject A shows signs of severe depression but remains stable. Subject B has developed an interesting form of protective detachment. He's essentially shut down emotionally to cope with the reality of permanent confinement. And their relationship? Destroyed. They blame each other for their situation and can barely tolerate being in the same room. The love that supposedly justified their betrayal lasted exactly as long as their comfort." Vincenzo nodded. "Show me." The video feed from their room showed two people who bore little resemblance to the confident pair who'd stolen his money and abandoned his children. Troy sat motionless in a chair, staring at nothing. Bethany lay on her cot, curled in a fetal position. They'd aged years and months. Their hair was gray, their faces gaunt, their eyes empty of hope or purpose. "They've requested to speak with you," Dr. Boyer added. "Both of them, separately. They each want to apologize, beg for mercy, the usual end-stage behaviors." Vincenzo considered this for a moment. In his original plan, he'd intended never to see them again once they were secured. Their punishment was isolation and the knowledge that they'd destroyed their own lives for nothing. But there was value in closure. The meeting took place in the facility's conference room. Bethany was brought in first, flanked by orderlies who positioned her in a chair across from Vincenzo. She looked like a different person, hollow-eyed, thin, broken. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Vince, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but please, the children, can you tell them their mother loved them? Loved them enough to abandon them for money and a man who wasn't their father? I made a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. I was selfish and stupid, and I destroyed everything good in my life." "Yes, you did. But they're innocent. They didn't deserve what I did to them." Vincenzo leaned forward slightly. "You're right. They didn't deserve it. That's why they'll never know you existed. They'll grow up believing their mother died when they were babies, a tragic loss, but not an abandonment. Please, you made your choice, Bethany. You chose yourself over them. Now they get to choose a life without the mother who didn't want them." When Troy was brought in 20 minutes later, his approach was different. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said immediately. "I don't deserve it. I betrayed our friendship, hurt your children, and helped destroy your family. I understand why you're doing this. Do you? It's justice. Not legal justice, but real justice. We took everything from you, so you took everything from us. And we deserve it. I just want you to know that I understand that now. The man who helped your wife abandon your children was a coward and a traitor. I'm not asking for mercy because I don't deserve it." Troy's acceptance was more complete than Bethany's desperate pleading, but it changed nothing about his situation. "You're right," Vincenzo said. "You don't deserve mercy. But I want you to understand something. This isn't just about what you did to me. It's about what you did to Marcus and Maya. They'll grow up believing their mother died in an accident and their father's best friend was killed trying to save her." Troy's face went white. "You're making me the hero of their story? I'm giving them a narrative they can live with. Better to believe their mother's friend died, trying to help her, than to know he was the one who helped her abandon them." The final meeting was brief. Vincenzo had said what he came to say, and Troy and Bethany had heard what they needed to hear. As he prepared to leave the facility for the last time, Vincenzo reviewed the security protocols one final time. The location was completely isolated. The staff were former military contractors who understood operational security. The patients were legally dead and would remain so indefinitely. Troy and Bethany would live out their days in comfortable confinement, with excellent medical care, nutritious food, and all the time in the world to contemplate their choices. They would never again see sunlight, breathe free air, or make decisions about their own lives. It was exactly what they deserved. 6 months later, Vincenzo married Sandy Boyer, the twins' nanny, in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. Marcus and Maya walked down the aisle as ring bearers, delighted to officially have the mother they'd already claimed. The wedding photos showed a happy family, a successful businessman, his loving wife, and 2 beautiful children who would grow up surrounded by stability and unconditional love. If anyone had asked about Vincenzo's first wife, they would have been told the tragic story of a young mother killed in a boating accident while traveling with a family friend who died trying to save her. It was a story that honored the dead while protecting the living. And in his private moments, when Vincenzo tucked his children into bed or watched them play in their backyard, he felt no guilt about the fate of the people who'd tried to destroy their family. Justice, true justice, wasn't about forgiveness or redemption. It was about ensuring that betrayal carried consequences